Good afternoon, and welcome to HealthSystemCIO.com's All-Stars panel, Key Considerations and Strategies for Moving Your PACS to the Cloud, a webinar tweet chat combo from HealthSystemCIO.com, sponsored by Iron Mountain. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of HealthSystemCIO.com, and I will be your webinar moderator today. We are having a simultaneous tweet chat being hosted by Kate Gamble, our Managing Editor and Director of Social Media. You can participate in a separate browser or on your phone by using the hashtag HSCIOchat, or you can simply view the tweet chat in the Media Viewer panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll also be using the Q&A panel today for sending in questions when they occur to you. Type them into the Q&A box, leave the default set to all panelists, and we'll look at them later in the program. And you can download the deck using the URL on your screen. It's at the bottom of our slides, and it's been sent out in the chat box. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to have our panel discussion featuring Dave Wanhala, IT Northern Region Manager with Aspirus Health, Joseph Marion, Principal with Healthcare Integration Strategies, and Leeann Lally, Solution Architect, Data Management for Healthcare with Iron Mountain. So without further delay, we are going to jump right in. Dave, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and role?
Yes. Again, my name is Dave Wanhala. I'm with Aspirus Hospitals. We have 8 hospitals, numerous clinics spread across the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and northern central Wisconsin. I've been in healthcare for 20 years. My first half of that as a technologist in CT and X-ray. I moved to an enterprise imaging IT role for that second half, and I'm currently, within the IT group now. So that's kind of a quick background of where I've come from.
Excellent. Very good. Joe?
I've been in healthcare for 41 years, and I've been involved with consulting and imaging IT for the past 24 years. So been seeing just about all the technology you could see.
Okay. Yep. Very good. Leeann?
I come from a background as a radiologic technologist as well as a PACS administrator, working in the Boston area for the last 24 years before I came to Iron Mountain. And currently I hold a position as a solutions architect and subject matter expert for the radiology PACS cloud environments at Iron Mountain's data management division.
Very good. All right. Thank you for that, Leeann. Joe, we're going to start with you on this question. What are some of the main reasons people are choosing to move their radiology PACS to the cloud?
Sure. I think one of the key factors is obviously cost. There are some cost advantages to a cloud-based PACS environment. I think there's also some support questions in there. So for facilities that may have some concern in the context of how do they support a system, using a cloud-based service means that some of that support is offset. And then lastly, I think there's the question of accessibility. So clearly if the information is in the cloud, it's potentially more accessible to a broader audience, which may be important for some sites.
All right, very good. Leeann?
So everything that Joe said I agree with, but I would also add on that there's a drive for disaster recovery in this day and age. So sending your data off-site both supports HIPAA compliance and business continuance in the event of a theft, flood, fire, or other disaster. And oftentimes people are backing up to tape, which wouldn't really provide that immediate access in the event of a disaster. It would take months to recover from. And it also wouldn't provide that continuous send of data. So if your tapes are only going out once a week and you have a disaster, 5 days after your tapes have gone out, you've lost that entire 5 days' work. So sending your data into the cloud is going to offer you that continuous archive that will always be protected.
Mm-hmm. And do you think most people are on tape, Leeann?
I see all different mixes out there. I see some people on tape. I see some people that have a secondary copy, but it's within the same building. So that's obviously not going to protect them from a disaster that takes the whole building out. I see people with a secondary data center across the street, which is good, but not as good as if it was 200 miles away, of course. So there's a lot of different combinations, and believe it or not, there's a lot of people out there that don't even have a secondary copy, and they're unfortunately learning the hard way as they come to us and they're looking for a cloud solution that they've gone through a disaster or a theft or some sort of malware attack or hijacking, and then they don't have the ability to recover that data, and that's when they're unfortunately coming to us.
So just to follow up, with people who are on tape, are there things about recovering from tape that maybe people who have not gone through the process don't realize? You mentioned 5 days. Can you talk a little more about recovering from tape?
So tape is typically offline, so it gets sent out, maybe once a week or twice a week to an off-site location. So if you were to lose your entire copy of your archive that resides within your institution, you would have to have those tapes returned to you so that you could upload them and get them back online. That process can take months. Sure, you have the data and it's able to be recovered, but what's happening during that time frame where you're actually doing the recovery? You're using up your resources, your people resources, right? And in the meantime, the radiologists don't have all the historical data that they need in order to make accurate diagnostic interpretations on current images. So if you look at a cloud copy, what can happen is that can all be recovered by sending out all of the data in a shuttle or pulling it back over the WAN, whichever way is faster, or just simply turning it on, if you have a disaster on site and you have a copy off site, or if you're using the cloud as your full archive, then you immediately have access to all of those images, no matter what happens on premise.
Very good. Dave, let's bring you in here. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I agree with the other two, as well as, getting that hardware off-site. That offers some cost savings, with the hardware maintenance, life cycle refreshes. There's FTEs to also manage that, so maybe you can redirect those FTEs within your organization, somewhere else if you're not having them manage that hardware, right on site. There's also more room for growth in the cloud. Let's say you want to, add different ologies. You acquire another facility. It could be easier to migrate that data and ingest those people while you're in the cloud. There's collaboration. There's real-time image sharing. That's a lot easier to do while you're within the cloud storage model. So a couple of different things I'd add to the others.
All right, very good. Leeann, let's start with you. How does a cloud-based PACS affect the end users, such as radiologists and technologists?
Well, it depends on what type of cloud-based PACS you got. If you got one that incorporates a new user interface, if you're moving to a VNA or something like that has the cloud attached to it, then it does affect the end users where they have to relearn how to use the interface. But if you're simply moving your storage from an on-premise data center to a cloud data center, then it doesn't actually affect the radiologist and the technologist. They still are looking at the same user interface they always have. They're still experiencing the same land speed access to images and historical images that they've always had. So to them, it would be a seamless integration.
Very good. Dave?
Yeah, a big pro for the for the radiologist is, being able to, read anywhere, the ability to sit in their home diagnostic workstation, anytime, anywhere access, the collaboration. Same thing with the technologist, collaboration, easily share images, with other colleagues, physicians off-site. So those are a couple of the benefits I see for the radiologists and technologists.
Very good. Joe, your thoughts?
Sure. I think I would concur in the context of the what I'd call spontaneity. Also, they're not dependent on a single system because they potentially have access to more than one environment through the cloud. Somewhat on the negative side, one could argue in the context of potential bandwidth issues and the potential risk of network failure. So I did work with one site that was looking at implementing a remote PACS type environment, and part of the IT concern was the network reliability and the ability for that network to be available when images needed to be sent.
Leeann,
that's a really good point. I do, actually. It's a really good point. And when you're shopping for a cloud vendor, that's probably the most important thing that needs to be considered, because when a radiologist, as everyone on this call knows, clicks on an image, it needs to show up on the screen, and all the historical images need to show up on the screen immediately. There's no time for lag. So the important thing to ask and the important thing to look for when you're shopping for a cloud vendor is, do they offer on-site cache? So what happens typically is if you're integrating, if you're moving your on-site archive into the cloud, you're replacing that on-site archive. So what's going to be left behind instead is a gateway, and that gateway sits on premise, and that's the only thing that will. What it does is it encrypts the data and it sends it over a secure VPN into the cloud. And what's important to have is local cache on that gateway. So that local cache, which can be, any number of terabytes, depending on what your organization needs are, will ultimately hold a full copy of your archive in the cache. So when your PACS system is queried for a particular image, it's going to reach out and it's going to grab it from that local cache on the gateway. It's only when that image is not found in the local cache that it will actually need to go out across the VPN using the network bandwidth and go out and seek it from the cloud. So typically today, most PACS systems, I'm unaware of any that don't have turned on a pre-fetching mechanism. So every patient that has an image performed has been scheduled within the EMR, and ultimately on the moved, that schedule is also on the PACS. So as soon as that patient's name hits the schedule on the PACS, it then reaches out and it pulls back the required historical data so that it's sitting in the cache. So you're going to find that the network speed of the hospital isn't really that important. It is important, I'm not saying it's not, but it isn't that important in order to have, if it is slower, have a full copy on site, or you're still going to have a prefetched copy on site. So it still shouldn't affect the radiologist or the technologist.
All right, very good, very good. Let's go to our next question. What are the cost pros and cons and comparisons between status quo, which would be on-premises, and a cloud architecture? Dave, let's start with you on that one.
Okay, yeah. So if you're looking at cost structures with, the status quo, you have all your hardware on site. You have your, your life cycle server refresh. You have the power to manage it for costs. You have your FTEs to manage, and a lot of. When you're doing that, when you're talking about your hardware on site, that's maybe a higher upfront capital expense, but maybe your ongoing maintenance and support for your operational expenses may be slightly lower in that model. Although there may be, if you don't go with a VNA model or a data manager type model, you may have multiple silos for all your data to have to deal with. So with the status quo, those are your basic costs that I can see. In a cloud, you may do a storage as a service or like a fee per exam, fee per study. A lot of times your hardware will be included in that agreement. Within the cloud, you're not responsible for providing those refreshes. The FTP, the full-time employee to support that model, a lot of times is within the vendor supplying you with the service, and you may just need one person on site to help, but you may not need as much of that person. There could be, maybe a little to smaller amount of upfront capital costs because there's a lot of the hardware, but you may have a little higher operational expense going forward with that storage as a service model. You can have a single pool of data that way too, maybe break down some of those silos, but that's kind of what I see with some of the cost breakdowns. I suppose I could have broken them down better with pros and cons, but
hey, we'll take it. We'll take it. Good stuff. Thank you, Dave. Joe, thoughts?
Yeah, I think relative to the cloud, one of the primary concerns needs to be in terms of the storage cost, the ongoing storage cost, the security aspect of that data, how secure is the data center that it's being stored at, and a very important factor is the data ownership, who in fact owns that data, and the ability to retrieve that data at the end of the contract. I think those are important factors. And then also, if there are other service lines that have previously been using, say, a radiology PACS, and you shift to a cloud-based model, can those other service lines continue to use that capability as well, or do they have to come up with their own solution? And relative to the status quo, I think clearly the security aspect, the data ownership, retention policies, the performance aspects are all pros that are offset by obviously the cost and the maintenance and support cost, the continuing or ongoing training costs, and any isolation from, say, the network that has to be done.
Excellent. Leeann?
Yep, great points. I agree with everything that's been said. Moving from a CapEx model to an OpEx is huge. Typically cloud, there's no CapEx involved unless it's an implementation fee of some sort in the beginning, but it's purely run on OpEx. And you're eliminating the need to maintain the 2 copies in the 2 locations, whether it be tape or 2 data centers, that all has a cost associated with it. But, for me, most importantly, it's eliminating the need to replace expensive existing archives and migrate that data at least once every 5 years, which was my experience. You have end-of-life equipment. You have, technology that's not compatible, and it just seems as though these archive migrations are frequent, and it takes a lot of resources, both financially and with people, to put those efforts in to get those migrations done. And then, of course, there's costly fines if there's data loss. And, fire theft, what we talked about earlier, there's very heavy fines that are involved if you are not able to reproduce those images. So that's another concern.
Okay, very good. Leeann, let's stick with you on this one. Does PACS, and Joe just brought this up, does PACS in the cloud offer more or less security against ransomware and hacking incidents versus self-managed environments?
It's a good question. As everyone knows, ransomware happens at the user level. So typically it's an employee clicking or downloading a link or file that contains the malware. The average cost of a healthcare breach in the U.S. is about $2.1 million. So it is a big concern. The endpoint storage is never, or I shouldn't say never, but it's never that I'm aware of the access point for these attacks, but potentially could be if it's direct attached storage and accessible from, an IT person's account. The way a cloud-hosted PACS can be helpful in this event is by eliminating the risk of theft on-site, or it also provides an encrypted copy off-site that's accessible only by the authorized PACS user itself, which is the PACS system. It's a fully monitored cloud archive, so it doesn't allow user access into the gateway, so nothing can be really changed in one lump. Users typically can only edit, delete, or change an object one object at a time. You know, there's typically a 60 to 90-day deletion rule built into the second copy of the cloud. So if there were changes that were made with some sort of hacking incident, those could be recovered from your vendor. And then vendors typically provide hardened gateways and storage nodes that close off software that are required for direct attacks.
Okay, very good. Joe?
I agree with everything. I think that one of the key factors is the whole degree of security. So a cloud-based solution may be spread across multiple users, and therefore there's likely to be a higher degree of security than perhaps maybe a local data center might provide. And I think it also the fact that it is spread across multiple people also means there's probably more discipline there relative to, say, for backups, so that if the backups are done properly and there is a hack and ransomware, it would potentially be much easier to reinstall those systems.
All right, very good. Joe, let's stick with you on this one. How easy is it to make the move to the cloud?
Well, I think clearly the most difficult part of it is going to be the migration of the data and the network connectivity questions. So we've got some feedback there. Okay,
yeah,
there we go. If there's any issues or incremental things that have to be done to get good network connectivity, that certainly can be a challenge. And then, as I said, the migration, if you have existing data that you also want to move to the cloud, that's going to take some time, and the accuracy with which that data is ingested is also going to be an issue.
All right, very good. Leeann?
The way I look at it is it's fairly easy to make the move to the cloud when you compare it to other migration efforts that would occur for storage. If you're looking at a cloud-based back-end storage only and not a VNA with the software, you're really just changing that IP destination from your on-premise archive to that gateway we talked about earlier. And yes, there would be a migration that would have to occur from the database from your PACS vendor, and it would be a one-time migration. But the good news is that it would only require 2 15-minute downtimes to flip those IPs, and all the other migration efforts can be done while you're up and running. So the choices are to migrate that data to the cloud over the WAN if you have the network capability to do that, or there's the option to load it all onto a shuttle and then shuttle that off into your cloud vendor's data center and have them upload it that way. So it depends on how quickly you want to make that transition and what your network abilities are. But other than that, once you've got that migration complete, you don't have to worry about it again in the future. So 5 years from now, you're not going to end up with an end-of-life, physical archive that you have to migrate all over again. So the migration process to move into the cloud is really no different than doing a migration from one physical archive to another, except that you won't have to do it again.
All right.
Anthony, the only caveat The only caveat I would give to that is that you have to have the vendor's cooperation sometimes in the context of those migrations. So some PACS systems, if you're migrating off of an existing one, going to the cloud can be proprietary environments, so there may be some quirks in the way that they store the data and whether all of the data gets transferred. So in some of the older PACS systems, there are things like voice clips that are not standard that may or may not get transferred. So it's just key that you involve the vendor in the process.
You mean the existing vendor? Is that what you mean, Joe?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, Leanne, let's talk a little bit about that. Have you had issues where you're taking on a client, a health system, and you're working to migrate their existing PACS up to your cloud, and you've got varying levels of cooperation from different vendors, and some have made it easy and some have not?
I have experienced that to some degree. They've held up the process, I think, in terms of moving as quickly as the customer would like. I believe they were trying to sell them their own solution, and that was that was the issue. But as far as losing any data in the actual migration, I haven't seen that happen. There's a lot of checks and balances that go into making sure that that everything matches file for file. It's a very thorough process that we make sure of. And yes, we always do work with the PACS vendor directly to make that migration happen. And even if you were having an on-premise archive installed, or you were upgrading your current on-premise archive, it would very likely still be a different vendor than your PACS vendor, and they would still have two different companies that were working together. There are companies like EMC that sell, like an Isolon or something like that, and that they don't make PACS systems. So it's very common and familiar for us to have to work with the PACS vendors.
Okay. Very good, very good. All right, Dave, let's bring you back in here. How many have already made the move to the PACS cloud that you are aware of? What are you hearing out there?
Yes, I'm aware of a couple of the smaller, maybe orthopedic physician type of groups that have fully moved to the cloud. But I'm more aware of maybe a hybrid model where like the storage or the DR is residing within the cloud, and maybe like Leeann was talking about earlier with that, that local cache or the local servers on site to be able to handle all the processing locally and more rely on the long-term archive or the storage within the cloud itself.
Very good. Leeann, what kind of inquiries, what kind of customers have you think here, what kind of inquiries, and are they moving, or are they just inquiring now?
We've really seen an uptick in the amount of people that are looking to move their PACS to the cloud, with all this, the technology growth, the 3D memos, the augmented reality, everything coming down the pike with, all the different ologies and all the shared imaging from one organization to another. They're just finding that they've run out of floor space, rack space, and resources to manage it themselves, and it's sort of driven them from reluctance based on unfamiliarity to a need that they really can't avoid. We have seen, as mentioned earlier, the smaller orthopedic offices. Those have also leveraged the cloud for different reasons, not because of the booming technology, but because they've had a lot of turnover in their IT department, or they don't have an IT department and they just need somebody to manage it for them and make sure that it's being managed correctly. And we have all different levels of people's desire to move to the cloud. We have people that still want to wrap their arms around that hardware and they still have the ability to do it, so they just want to put one copy in the cloud in case they need it and keep their on-premise solution. We have people that have that hybrid ask where they want us to build them an on-site solution and put one copy in the cloud for them, and then we have the people that just want to turn it over to us and have us manage it, 2 copies in our cloud, and that's it. So the adoption is here, and it's varying in its asks, but it's definitely moving fast.
Joe?
I think you have to differentiate between storage in the cloud and a full-scale PACS, or what some people refer to as PACS as a service or software service. In the full, I think the PACS in the cloud or storage in the cloud aspect is probably more widespread today, whereas the number of people that have decided to go completely to the cloud, which means that the display stations and everything else are working off of cloud storage, that's probably not quite as widespread and is probably still evolving. There are a few companies that are chasing that. There's also some large radiology practices that have that sort of model in the context of providing the service to the hospital as opposed to just reading for the hospital.
Excellent, excellent. Very good. All right, Leeann, let's go with you on the next question. What are the concerns holding people back from moving to the cloud?
I think mostly it's just unfamiliarity, or they're busy with other projects and don't think that they have time. But as we mentioned earlier, it's less time-consuming in the long run, where they're eliminating the need to continually migrate, to new storage. But I think the fear of the cloud is getting lessened, where more people are using it, in one way, shape, or another, whether it's, Facebook or Snapfish or any of those different things. Those are cloud offerings, right? So people are becoming more familiar with it, and like I said earlier, there's a strong need where they're running out of space. But as knowledge increases, the fear will decrease.
Joe?
I would agree with that. I think that also there's a couple factors in the context of when you're considering perhaps who the cloud vendor might be, the SLAs and the assurance that that level of performance is going to be maintained, and also not that it relates to, say, an Iron Mountain as a well-established company, but if you were to go with a smaller potential vendor, there might be the risk that that vendor could go out of business.
Right, right. Dave?
Yes, I'd say, that they touched on them quite a bit, but the unknown, taking a big step to moving everything off-site if you want to go for the full-blown solution, and how will it work? Will the images be fast enough based on bandwidth? What if there's an internet failure? Do you have redundancy? Do you have multiple ISPs to be able to handle that? The SLAs, like Joe had said, you want to make sure you have those agreements in place and make sure that the security is one of the main things that you're having your vendor prove. How are they encrypting the data? You have your SSLs in place. So those are a few of the concerns that people may be, concerned about as they move forward towards the, towards the unknown. As I said, it's not as well. It's not as well known as everything, like a normal PACS has always been. So.
Right. Very good. All right, Joe, let's stick with you. What criteria should people look for when selecting a PACS cloud vendor?
I think some of the key things, and again, differentiating between, say, the full cloud PACS model, software as a service, as opposed to just cloud storage. The key, I think, is going to be the level of security, as well as maybe how many clients they currently are supporting, their willingness to accept your SLAs, and the number of services offered. So it could be just your rudimentary PACS, but there may be other services that might be part of that that would be important to a site, such as advanced visualization or dose management.
Dave?
Yes, I agree with all those statements, and also you know, take a look at the cost structure of what they're offering. Is it a you know, storage as a service or software as a service, or you know, a pay per use? Are there different subscription fees? Are you paying for additional data coming in? You know, you have your data retention. You know, are you paying anything extra for the DR, for image, you know, image sharing? Those types of things also to look at.
Right. Basically, don't get into something and then find out there are costs you didn't expect and didn't factor in. That's a big concern.
Yep.
Okay, Leeann, your thoughts?
Absolutely. Definitely look for those hidden costs and fees. If you're looking at a cloud vendor that is not primarily healthcare driven, or more specifically radiology, works within the radiology environment specifically, you're going to find that the price may at first look more impressive, but you're going to find that, you know, with radiologists in physicians, they're pulling back images all day long. So you want to make sure that you're not getting any egress charges every time you touch, modify, or pull back an image. And that's why I think the radiology-specific cloud vendors are you really want to stick with. Make sure that their data centers they support HIPAA compliance, ISO, SOC, all of that stuff. Make sure that they have the vendor maturity and stability. As mentioned earlier, that they're not going to, you know, the company's stable, it's not going to go out of business in a year. They have an existing customer base, their cloud's been in operation, and they can prove that its merits. You know, I can tell you Iron Mountain's radiology cloud has been functioning for 10 years and has almost 2 billion images stored. You want to make sure that your architecture is going to provide you with that LAN speed access, that it has that gateway that holds cache, it has a failover gateway, it has a secure VPN, that they're encrypting the data before they send it and while it's at rest, and that they're going to also maintain the equipment as part of the agreement and have that 24/7 monitoring as part of the service.
Very good. Well, all right, let's stick with you, Leeann, for the next question. Going forward, what future proofing and additional benefits will a cloud PACS provide?
Yeah, as we've mentioned earlier, you know, eliminating those silos so that the future technology of things like virtual reality and, you know, data analytics, things like that, those are all going to be able to be leveraged from the one location. That you're looking at technology that we have now, like 3D Nano, where we took file sizes from 40 megabytes up to 450 megabytes, and the rapidly expanding technology that we haven't even imagined yet that's coming down the road. You know that you're going to have that infinitely scalable back-end storage, and you're not going to have to worry about running out of space in the middle of the night and having to deal with that, because hopefully, you know, none of us have had to do that, but it does happen, right?
Right, right. Very good. Joe?
I think broader accessibility is also going to be a factor. So as medicine expands and value-based medicine, population health management, as Leeann, I think, was saying, in the context of analytics and AI applications and whatever, there may be more ability to access those. There may be ability to access new features that one might have not had access to if the system were local, because there might not have been capital to update those capabilities. Another factor, I think, is also more support of standards. So there's probably more likelihood to support standards and new standards such as FHIR, and then access potentially to later or more up-to-date security.
Very good. Dave?
You can also look at the scalability of the product itself. If you're adding more health systems or hospitals, all of a sudden your imaging volume doubles. You're not trying to add all those servers and storage and everything on site and maintaining those. You can easily work with your vendor to ingest those into your solution. And as you grow with the what they say, the other ologies, right? If you want to break down those silos with the PACS, CPACS, visible light, but photos, whatever, you can start to put those all in one central area, within the cloud itself, and not have all these different storage things sitting all over within your environment.
Very good, very good. All right, before we go to our next question, I want to remind the audience that if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A panel and leave the default set to all panelists. Joe, let's go with you here. We're getting close to the end of our event. Can you offer a key challenge for the listeners? What do you challenge them to go back to their health systems and do, which will improve how IT supports patient care, business operations, or both, specifically as it relates to our topic today?
Sure. I think there's a couple of key factors. The first is that radiology is not an island, and PACS is really extending beyond radiology these days. So it's crucial that if one is looking at moving in this direction, that it's consistent with the IT strategy for other initiatives such as the EHR and other potential systems or solutions in other areas, again, in the context of enterprise-wide imaging. So I've worked with at least one health system that initially it started as a radiology project and very quickly evolved into an enterprise strategy in the context that radiology's objectives in going in that direction weren't necessarily consistent with where the hospital wanted to move. So I think that's a key challenge that people need to look at.
Very good. Leeann?
I would say go back and think about what your current disaster recovery plan is with your medical imaging. Do you have 2 copies of your archive? Is there one of those copies off-site? How far away is that secondary site? Is that secondary copy continuously uploaded? Is it encrypted? Who has access to these locations? And could that space or equipment be re-leveraged for other systems? If you don't think that any of these are meeting the needs of HIPAA compliance, and you would have a secure way to get your images back in a disaster, then you should seriously consider looking into the cloud.
All right, very good. So is our last question. Dave, you want to start out? Give us any final thoughts, advice, any words of wisdom for our audience?
Sure. I'd say, evaluate your needs. Will this solution work for you, taking everything off-site, or do you want to take a look at more of a tiered model or a hybrid model or something else where you have storage on-site? Are you doing 3D workups? Are you doing breast tomosynthesis? Those studies are large. Breast tomosynthesis can get up to 1.5 gig per study, so you want to take a look at that. Are you looking to grow? Do you not have a current disaster recovery model? Where you can utilize something like this with it. So I just take a look at all those different things. What are you looking to get out of it, and what are you trying to accomplish really by moving to the cloud, either fully or partially?
Very good, Joe.
Yeah, I think the one key concern that people tend to overlook is they get enamored and excited on the front end about moving to the cloud. I think they need to consider and make sure that they are aware of what the termination costs and consequence or circumstances might be in the context that if they do want to get out of the contract at some point in the future. And they need to consider that in the front end so that doesn't become a big surprise at some point in the future.
Very good. Getting out of the current contract, right? All right, Leeann, your thoughts. We'll give you the last word today.
I mean, agree with everything there. It's all good points, but the bottom line is I've just seen too many people who have come to us and moved to the cloud after they've lost everything or in the middle of a really large recovery project. And if you've got the news on lately, you know that there's a lot going on out there, whether it's natural disasters or, you know, cybersecurity attacks or what have you. And it's really because there's no budgeting that really has to go into moving to the cloud, as it's an OpEx model and there's no upfront costs. It's worth it to start at least looking into it and seeing how easy it would be within your own facility.
Excellent. Well, that is about all we had time for today. When you close out your WebEx window, you're going to be taken to a post-event survey. If you could take a moment to answer that, we'd appreciate it. Regarding continuing education, those of you who hold the CHIME CHCIO certification get 1 CEU for attending today's event. So let CHIME know you were here, and if you've asked us to do so, we certainly will. You'll receive an email when our archive recording of this event has been posted to our YouTube channel. If you'd like us to produce a webinar on the topic of your choice, you can contact Nancy Wilcox from our team, and you can go to our website to see our upcoming schedule. So with that, I want to very much thank our panel, Dave Wanhala, Joe Marion, Leeann, Lally, and I want to thank our sponsor, Iron Mountain, for making this event possible. And of course, I want to thank you, our attendees, for coming to our events. So with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.